Why are INFJs perceived to be prophets of a sort? This is a question that was asked by a viewer. And it's an interesting question because there's many angles, for tackling it. The historical angle, the current angle, the more critical angle, and so on and so forth. So first of all, the question that we might want to ask is it true that INFJs tend to be seen as prophets or described as prophetic? And my answer to this would be yes and no. There's a difference between, like this INFJ as in like this or that INFJ, this or that individual INFJ, and the INFJ as this particular item that is inserted in the collective unconscious of anybody who's interested in MBTI or Jungian typology. So the INFJ is embodied in this symbol that sort of travels around the collective unconscious of people who are interested in Jungian typology, Myers-Briggs and so forth, is indeed conceived as representative of an individual who has a prophetic quality. And something that I've already said before is that that's a source of envy for many people, which also means that when an individual INFJ is encountered who is an INFJ of flesh and blood and who doesn't seem to actually perfectly embody those particular qualities, there's often a movement toward sort of either questioning their genuine INFJ-ness or a kind of criticism or devaluing of that particular INFJ for not living up to the potential that this INFJ, in the more symbolic sense of the collective unconscious, is supposed to represent. So there is definitely a sense in which this idealized INFJ, this archetypized INFJ, is sort of aggregating to itself as a symbol, among other qualities, among other condensed qualities, because condensation is a characteristic of the unconscious. One of the condensed qualities is a prophetic quality. Now we might ask ourselves, how come that quality exists in the first place, symbolically anyway, in such a way that it impacts how a non-INFJ expects to experience interaction with an actual INFJ of flesh and blood? And there's possible ways of thinking about it, but I think the two main reasons are the quality of the INFJ psychology and historical time. The quality of an INFJ psychology is mediated by what I have been calling for many months now the NI world. And we know that the NI world is connected in some way to external reality, but it's also a world unto itself. It's also a world that's not governed by the same temporality of present-oriented external reality. The NI world tends to sort of regulate external reality, the experience of external reality, via its own temporality, which is a temporality of the longue durée, long duration. This is something that I discuss abundantly in my book, The Infinite Soul, and INFJ Life in a Modern World. The idea that the NI world, the temporality of the NI world is slower, and it goes much further into the past and extends into the future. Now, when you get a meeting point between the temporality of the NI world and the present sort of fixation of the external world manifested in interaction with social relations, well, if the INFJ is confident enough to kind of let NI speak through them, they are going to sound prophetic, because prophetic, when we think of someone who sounds prophetic, we think of someone who is actually able to make predictions on the basis of past heritage, past knowledge, the wisdom of the ages informing what will unfold in the relatively distant future. When those two conditions are met, you sound prophetic. A lot of INFJs are compliant, adaptive, submissive. They don't allow themselves to speak like this. Many other INFJs are withdrawn, solipsistic. They speak like this to themselves, but they withdraw from other people. They don't speak like this to other people. So in both cases, we have an instance of an INFJ fearing how this way of speaking, which in a way is very natural to them, fearing that the way that this way of speaking will be received by other people. But There's also INFJs who are more secure, more spiritual, or more spiritualized, who will tend to speak like this more often because they will be more in connection with their self. They've been born attuned to their inner world, to their individuality. They'll be more individuated. At least, this is how we could describe the situation. And this is where the notion of historical time exists as well, because it's perfectly possible to imagine that there were times in the past where this kind of speaking, this kind of prophetic language was socially valued. The particular tendency that INFJs have in their natural state of speaking prophetically is never changed. But what is socially valued, what is considered valuable, what allows you to accrue status, that changes over time. Nowadays, we live in a technological world. We live in a world that is very geared towards instant gratification. We're in a world that is also influenced by the scientific viewpoint. There's lots of aspects of the cause and effect, everything. It tends to be instrumental, and it does not chime well with this idea of the prophetic tone, which means that INFJs who speak with a prophetic tone are likely to be seen as weirdos, which is also why we can understand the compliant INFJs. We can understand the solipsistic INFJs. Their fear is not groundless. There is the risk of social devaluation because the way that they articulate their propheticness, if you like, is not very aligned with what's valued nowadays. But in the past, it's perfectly possible to imagine that it was valued. And we have a lot of justifications for believing that, particularly the influence of religious figures, spiritual figures, and so forth. So this particular image that still exists as part of the collective unconscious of everybody who's interested in type, the INFJ has those traits because those traits have been valued in the past. They've survived inside the archetype. Okay? And so the INFJ is a prophet in disguise. The INFJ is also a kind of psychoanalyst in disguise. Knowing how you can be a prophet in the modern day is a challenge for INFJ happiness, INFJ sort of, the meaningfulness of INFJ life, the purposefulness of INFJ life. Because in the same way that, eras changed, the world evolves, if an INFJ is going to be a prophet today, it's not going to be an incarnation that looks like the prophets of yesteryear. It will be a prophet for modern times, and that can be socially valued. That's a whole challenge. It starts with islands of spirits. It's a concept that I'll again use in my book, The Infinite Soul, and it also depends on many other things that we can discuss in more detail. But if you want to know more about this, The Infinite Soul. An INFJ being an infinite soul is in some way a prophetic INFJ. So if you want to know more about how in this hostile world INFJs can find happiness, purpose, and value, this is the book to get, and it's available down below. The first link is down below. My previous book on the INFJ is called The Ecstatic Soul, which is a deep look at the mind of the INFJ, what's it like to have an INFJ consciousness, an INFJ mind, to think like an INFJ, to be an INFJ, which is why it's called A New Look at the INFJ Personality, and it's the deepest investigation of this question you'll find online. And as you can see, graphically speaking, the two books go very well together, use the same concept, so I recommend that you get both books. Don't forget that the absolute lifeblood of my channel, guys, is your Patreon page. If you want me to continue producing very regular quality content where I delve deep into these issues, I depend on your kind support. My Patreon page is down below. We have a growing community there. If you join me, you support my work, you keep the channel going, and you get access to bonus videos every 2 weeks going in depth just for patrons, and access to the community and myself to ask questions and recommend a lot of things. So hopefully see you there, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye bye, guys.